So, same fight, new moves. Well, certainly same fight. I mean, throughout my trade union since I was politicised, I understood the nature of class struggle and what the war on workers was about. It has been the same fight. But then by extension, I was taken by your stat, Dan, about how Labor had increased for those years in the United States, from the 30s, the Jim Crow policies, the racist policies, and then why there was this big hump that then after the 70s started to get back to the early days of the robber barons and the Carnegies and the tremendous gouging of our community wealth. And I thought that probably the same fight was also defined to a certain degree by war and not peace. Because in those early days, the war was against workers. The war was against, through racism, through Jim Crow. If you ever read that wonderful book, Labor's Untold Story, History of the Labour Movement in North America, and it defined that, it was the threat to civilisation in the States was from organised labour. And there was a guy named Harry Bridges who built the longshoremen together with other progressives out of San Francisco in the 30s. Many were killed. Trade unionists are still killed, by the way, in South America and throughout Africa. You still get assassinated for your beliefs. They don't get killed so much in Australia and the United States, but in those days they did, and there are a number of longshoremen that were killed on the streets of San Francisco seeking to have a hiring hall that basically gave them the dignity of selection and some sort of merit based on their political views and their industrial views, as well as the strength of their arms and the strength of their back. See, where that big conflux came from was the war on workers became the war of workers against workers. So through the First World War, you see a gravitation towards collectivism and community and the unfairness and the polarisation of justice. And then in the Second World War, it was even more acute. And you see fascism and sort of that misrepresentation of collectivism and unionism, and to have workers pitched against workers, again in a far different way than the colonial basis of the First World War. But then the war changed, it became more segmented. The Cold War was an ideological war and a philosophical war, and it was again back to war on workers. It was a war on workers. And we had a recent experience in Gdansk where we had dock workers that were couldn't get an agreement, were discriminated against, their work was contracted out, precarious work. All of those things that we know are so pervasive in it and represent our workplaces here in Australia, your workplaces in Poland, Solidarność, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher talking about the new world order and the dignity of labour and the difference between Western labour and Eastern Bloc labour, and that we had to stand by Solidarność. And there we were, up against, who would believe it, who owns supporting Gdansk? Macquarie Bank. Isn't it wonderful? The pervasive, ubiquitous nature of Australian corporate culture, And we're over in Gdansk, and so we had to go and deal with that, and had to deal with the local owners and the shareholders, and over a period of time we were able to be successful. See, translation hasn't come accidentally or on any failure on our part. We have not failed working men and women. We have nurtured working men and women and created the dignified basis of their lives, not only in this country but internationally. And everything about decency and work has been defined by the leadership of the labour movement. And that's not trade union officials, working men and women, the people that went to jail, the people that mobilised on the streets, the people that organised strikes. That was the rank and file membership that knew injustice and identifies injustice when they see it. And that hasn't changed. maybe the moves have got to change, but that identification of the inequity and the inequality has never been any greater today than it has been in the history of labour, if we want to measure that through the Industrial Revolution and onwards. And so we've got a new Industrial Revolution, automation, technology, communication, but it hasn't been translated even into the New World Order. War hasn't disappeared, it's become much more segregated. It is just as violent and pervasive as ever before, but done in a much different way, and it is still about segregating working communities. Segregating on race, that we've spoken today, segregating on sex, segregating on age, segregating on gender. See, this is the great lie that we get told, the great fake news. And part of what we need to do in the mobilisation of our energies is to identify that, and you've heard so much of it today, and it doesn't matter whether it's on social networking or Facebook or out on the streets. Mass action, the mobilisation of mass action, where workers, we're here today, we're not in some big digital room, we're in a real room reaching out to ourselves, each other, that we've come a long way to be able to gain more knowledge and insight about what we do about the war on workers and what we do about the inequality that is keeping us awake, as we say at sea. We are untying the knots of greed and elitism that has never been more pervasive and obvious, that 8 or 10 people in the whatever stat you want to use, the Oxfam stat or any local stat, 8 or 10 people control the same wealth as 3.5 billion working people. Come on. That's not a hard deal to sell to workers and the great humanity, the great expanse of humanity. 7.5 billion people, up from 2 or 3 billion people when the industrial... they want answers. And they're not getting them off their politicians. And everything that we see and we understand to be labour activists and community activists means that we get it. In this room, we get it. But what we've got to do is reach out to each other all over the world and get it in a much different way than ever before. And this is where communication can be worked against us. Fake news, Murdoch, not another one. Our ubiquitous destructive sector in the corporate, we sent Harry Bridges over to San Francisco, a great Labor hero, but we also sent Rupert Murdoch. Glad he's not an Australian anymore. Got rid of that one. So it works against us, the great lie, and it annoys the shit out of us because we all read the Australian. I don't think anyone else bloody well does. But we do, and it upsets us. I think that's all about it. He gives it away now just to upset us. So you're going to have an aneurysm. I measured the success of my trade union life by the number of anti-MUA editorials. That's how I know I'm going well. I don't see myself in the editorial. I know I'm really stuffed. It's time to retire. Fuck off. So the communication works our way. But to do that, we got a workshop on workers' capital. There's so many things that we can discuss about how we deliver it, how we find out each other, how we connect by our communities. But we have to be more functional. We have to reform our trade union institutions. We have to put pressure on the ILO. We have to put pressure on our own selves. We have to put pressure on our pension funds, so that they're all profit back to the members and take long-term risk mitigation and don't privatise the things that we own and give them away to people that come back and charge us more while running them all down. That's why we've got to jump. That's the bloody Grenfell Towers, public housing, that was taken away during the Thatcher, and now we're burning them to death. This is almost a metaphor for what we're against. So we have to be functional. We have to talk to each other. We have to merge. We have to found a conversation across the world, in Europe, not be so Eurocentric. be able to look at Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, not forget about Africa, not forget about inclusion in all those areas of Asia Pacific, because what we're doing, and this is the bit, in my last 4.25 minutes, this is the bottom line. We made a decision when Patrick's 2,000 mercenaries walked into our workplace here in Australia, dock workers that had been secretly trained, and my dock workers members that had done nothing except legally bargained over 120 years, come to terms with containerisation and technology, had translated that into decent work, had fought for their rights on the job, for respect from the boss, to have safe work, did nothing else, and then found out that they were working in $2 companies and had no rights. We knew then that we had to reach out much further than just this wonderful Labor community here in this country. We had to reach out and we had to grasp what globalisation was about. And we've seen more with the TPP and the secretive services. If it wasn't for WikiLeaks being able to tell everybody what they'd already negotiated, what was in square brackets and what wasn't, these people were negotiating away our lives, the next generation of working men and women's lives. They're negotiating it away now in secrecy. And yet we can't collaborate to the same extent that we understand what Walmart workers are understanding and identify that there are retail workers in this country that are doing it, to be able to get leverage. See, in the ITF, we went back and we had to reclaim the ITF from the bureaucrats that ran it. And it's about bottom-up organising. It's not hard. You go and get workers because they are sick of their lives and what's happening to them. And it's easy to recruit them as long as we are telling them the truth and we respect their opinion. They are us. They will be us. They will continue to be us as much as they were part of the great Labor movement for the last 100 odd years. When we go, here we go. We've got to go out there and organise the supply chains. We've got to link mines and manufacturing and retail. We have to get into those areas, into shipping. Not for the TPPs and the service and all of the crooks and the gangsters and the tax avoiders and the people that have invested in Mossack Fonseca. What a lovely name that is. A bunch of blown away fascists living in Panama, still rorting the joint. The Prime Minister father from the UK and our Prime Minister had some of his dough in Mossack Fonseca. Come on. That's the future of the joint. We've got to get into that shipping. We've got to get into that road, that rail. We've got to link all of those workers and give them the narrative. We have never gone away. We are never going to fight each other. We're going to work together universally. We believe that our labour movement will secure our futures. It's fundamental to the needs of our daily lives in our communities, not only in this country and internationally, and that we will then have the ability to go and challenge them where they deserve to be challenged, on the basis of truth and honesty, and who has a real vision for working men and women in the future of this country and who hasn't. And I'm very, very pleased to be here and part of that today.